Okay, good morning, So this is the third and final installment or third lecture for this week, week 9. So again, we're learning about social stratifications and different types of inequality this week. There are 6, right? So we went over economic inequality in class, the first lecture. We went over race and ethnicity in the second lecture. And in this lecture, we will go over gender inequality, inequality based on sexual orientation, inequality based on age, and inequality based on able-bodiedness. So we'll cover those 4. Yes, so this does not mean that you do not need to read the book, because you need to read the book. I'm just going over supplemental information that you need to know. So as usual, let me share my screen with you and we can begin. So I think this is it. Okay. So we're going to start off with gender inequality, but I want to pick up where I left off yesterday. So I said that I would come back and give you an example of the functional perspective when discussing racial inequality. So remember, a symbolic interactionist is a micro type of theory. It's a micro type of lens. We are really looking at our local surroundings and seeing whether or not racism, and we're talking about racial inequality or racism, and these acts of discrimination, microaggressions, and prejudice influence us. When they influence us, how they influence us, can race dictate whether or not we get into schools in our local surroundings, hospitals in our local surroundings, etc. So we take it down to more of a neighborhood type context, local context, etc. When it comes to the conflict perspective, we state that the conflict theorist states that racial inequality is harmful, period. Okay? It does a disservice not just to those who are racial minorities, but everyone, okay, in the long run. So it is not beneficial to us. And again, if we take into consideration Karl Marx and Max Weber, they will say, right, like, because there is such, when it comes to racial inequality, there is such strife, there is such tension between racial minorities that eventually those who are in oppressed, those who are oppressed will eventually rise up, just like economic inequality. Okay, so our real life examples of the conflict perspective of Marx Weber, of Karl Marx, are things such as BLM movements with Alaskan Natives, movements with Indigenous people in Australia, movements with Indians and Native Americans, not just in the US, but in Canada and around Latin America and South America. Okay, those are all happening today in 2020. It is such a wild time to be living in. Now, the functionalist perspective, which I said I would come back to, functionalists would state, like, and again, it might not come out like, okay, racism is okay. Okay, racism is good. They might not say it like that, but essentially that is what they are okaying, right? Racism benefits us, okay? So these, and it's interesting because if you go back to our definitions of discrimination, prejudice, de facto segregation, de jure segregation, and personal racism and institutional racism. Racism does benefit those who are typically at the top. And if we're talking about racial stratification, which we are, the people who typically occupy the top tiers, if you look at institutions such as education, are white, state bodies are white, religious organizations are white, working places are white, etc. Right? So maybe locking people out of certain types of job employment, which is illegal, but it happens, benefits those people. So you would want things to either stay the same or this quote, like, make America great again. This is where the BLM movement comes in, okay? And this whole kind of why, not just BLM, but why there are people who don't agree with that saying, if you understand what I'm saying right now, right? The reason why people don't like, that make America great or make America great again is because for many people in minority groups, and refer back to our book when we talk about minority groups, because we're not just, when I say minority groups, I'm not talking about racial minorities. Racial has to be at the beginning of it. It's not just racial minorities. So all types of minorities. So minorities when it comes to sexual orientation, age, race, and class. When you're saying make America great again, those times were great for certain people, okay? And the systems, the structures, the institutions in place benefited those who occupied the top tiers in society. And if we're talking about racial inequality, which we were in the last lecture, we're talking about whites. So it was never great for people of color, okay? And so you have movements that can also occur within the functionalist perspective. Typically, when it comes to the functionalist perspective, a lot of these movements don't necessarily need to take place in the street. They can happen with policy and law. So they happen behind the desks of big elite men, typically in the United States, right? So these types of men who happen to, if we're talking about racial inequality, I'm giving you this example, can sign laws and policies in place that make America great again, and that make racism okay. That's what we mean, okay? And again, I'm not calling anybody a racist, right? But we operate in these systems involuntarily. So voting is not voting, is participating involuntarily, if you understand what I'm saying. Okay? Voting for a certain president is an action. You are stating your place, you're laying your claim, but not voting, which many people also do, is also an involuntary way of participating in these systems, which again, people do. Okay, I can do it, you can do it, etc. Okay, but we also have extreme, and your book, chapter 11, just did talk about extreme interrelations. So you also have institutions such as, or groups, not institutions, but groups such as the KKK, which also want to go back to that. Okay, so that's the functionalist perspective when it comes to racial inequality. Sound good? Okay, so again, yeah, that's the clearest example. So again, when it comes to racial inequality, you might not be a person that says racial inequality is good, but if you don't do anything to combat it, you are saying it's good. Okay. So it's just a crazy year to be living. Let's go into gender inequality. Okay. Oh, also, you should know one of the reasons I didn't bring up the Black Panther Party is because of the history. Why did the Black Panther Party come up? Why did it arise? And it was because of the KKK murdering, lynching Black people. So you Blacks form a group, Black Panther Party, to protect themselves. That's solely why the Black Panther Party first arose. Okay, look at the history of it, Google, etc. But you can also take a race and ethnic tensions class with me if you choose, and I can talk about it. Okay, so gender inequality. So these next couple of sections are going to go quick for this lecture. I'm sorry that they're taking so long, but it's dense, and I do want you guys to really get as much out of this class as you can, not just with this section, but all of them. So let's go into gender inequality. Gender inequality is a system in which males and or females are perceived and treated as unequals, usually characterized by belief, sorry for the spelling mistake, a belief in male supremacy. Now, when it comes to gender inequality, it's important to know the difference between sex and gender. They are different. When we talk about sex, we are referring to biological characteristics such as chromosomes. And again, one sex has XX chromosomes, which is female, and then males have XY chromosomes. However, please, again, Google yourself, there are more than two sexes. We have an increasing number of people today being born intersex, okay? And what does that mean, okay? Intersex individuals, okay, are individuals who have a different biological or chromosome makeup. So they may be born with XXY chromosomes, an extra chromosome, XXY chromosomes, XYY chromosomes, or what's the other, the other formation, okay? And it is getting even more common, okay? So I don't want to, I think the statistic was 1 in every 10,000 or 1 in every 1,000 person is born intersex. Okay, hold on just a second. I just want to verify that. If I can. I don't have the stat, but when I have the stat, I will post it up in the description box. Okay, I'm not gonna waste any time with that, but it's common, okay? So we are used to the binary when it comes to sex. People are born either biologically male or biologically female, okay? But we know that there are hermaphrodites, people who are born biologically hermaphrodites, biologically hermaphrodites, and biologically mermaphrodites. There are 5 sexes, okay? And again, take a sex and gender class with Christy Arford if you want to continue to learn more and educate yourself on this. You also need to know what gender is. Gender is a social construct like race. It is a human creation, okay? And it refers to behaviors, personal traits, and social positions that society attributes to being male or female. Gender is something that we do. This week, if you haven't already read, you have an article by Judith Lorber called Doing Gender. What it means to be gendered me. What it means to be gendered me, right? And gender, again, is based on, you know, behaviors, personal traits, and social positions. It's kind of like how you're born a female, but how do you be a female, right? A person's sex, as determined by his or her biology, does not correspond always with his or her gender. Sex and gender are not interchangeable. Remember, when I refer to sex, when your sociology book refers to sex, we are referring to biological characteristics and chromosomes. When we refer to gender, we are referring to how one acts like, so behavior, acts like a male, you know, looks like a male, etc. Holds positions and occupies positions that are male. We're referring to gender. Okay. Figure from chapter 12. So that's our gender, sex, and sexual orientation chapter. Some children may learn at an early age that their gender does not correspond with their sex. Okay. And again, this is something that we know. We might not know people who go through this, right? But this is something that we know children can go through, okay? Where, you know, you figure out that you are born a certain way, but you don't feel a certain way, or your gender doesn't correspond with your sexual makeup. Another figure, while the biological differences between males and females are fairly straightforward, the social and cultural aspects of being a man and a woman can be complicated, especially the further on we age in society. What we define as, and I'm referring to gender, what we refer as, manly and womanly things to do change. Like, if you look throughout history, women's places used to be in the house, right? Taking care and rearing the children, cooking, cleaning, etc. And the US goes through a couple of, wars, okay, where women now, while men are out in the armed forces doing whatever they need to do, women are now occupying spaces that men used to occupy. So we're talking about, women now becoming engineers, women now, running operating services, women now, working in factories. And look at us today. Women occupy all realms of different workforces. Okay. And I'm not saying that it completely, it's still rare to find, women who work in engineering, the STEMs in general, but they're there. Okay. So, the cultural and social factors and aspects of being a man and a woman today are very complicated, especially when you hear some of the rhetoric in 2020 about where women and men, the positions that they should hold. Okay. In the US, inequality among the genders is justified by the idea that biology is destiny. The ideology is that there are clear biological differences between men and women, and therefore there is an automatic sexual division of labor. For example, okay, since women carry children, our bodies, have uteruses and ovaries, they are automatically assumed to be better workers in the home than out in work fields, okay? Because our bodies can do these things, our bodies can hold and carry children, the assumption is that, wow, women are the best, when it comes to taking care of children. And we see this, right? Especially when, parents go through divorce, when children are oftentimes given to moms, right? Because the assumption is, right, and it's not based on law, the assumption is the mom carried these children. So, it's important for the child to go with the mom. And then since the male body is naturally physically stronger, right, men put on muscle a lot faster than women, right? They're automatically assumed to be better in fields such as construction, hard laborish jobs, and even jobs that require strenuous thinking. Okay, men are assumed to be smarter, etc. Okay. So think about this. Do these assumptions still exist today? Okay. If you do think that these assumptions still exist today, where do you see these assumptions existing? If you don't think that they exist today, why do you see it that way? Okay. And I would also urge you to look at fields that you are not familiar with, even fields that you think that you're familiar with. Okay. Male patriarchy. So these are some terms. You're going to go over matriarchy and patriarchy in our gender, sex, and sexual orientation chapter. So make sure you go over it thoroughly. Male patriarchy and why it's harmful to all people. So our book is going to go over a discussion on feminism, and every semester when I go over feminism, a lot of people just think that feminism just helps women, and that's not it. Okay, so a lot of these mainstream people talking about feminism shouldn't be talking about feminism, and they perpetuate assumptions. Okay, so let's get into it. Male patriarchy is defined as a system in which male dominance is considered a natural and inalienable right. It has led to what we know as sexism, okay, which is the subordination of a person on the basis of their sex. Just like racism, sexism can operate at the level of the personal and impersonal. So remember in the last lecture, I went over impersonal racism and institutional racism. So institutional racism is how racism is embedded, okay, in the routine functions, institutions of structures of society. So just like racism is embedded in those structures, so is sexism, okay, which accounts for why we still don't see women in certain occupations, many women in certain occupations, okay? So it's not to say, so listen to me, it's not to say that things aren't changing in society and things haven't changed. They have. But these institutions and how they were founded, right, way before we were even in existence, still have these remnants of racism, still have these remnants of sexism, which could be built into their laws and their policies and how these institutions run and operate. Okay. Again, these institutions, I've said this in previous slides before, need us for them to continue to exist. And we perpetuate them. We okay them. Or we don't say anything about them. Male chauvinism, which is prejudice and discrimination. You need to know the difference between male chauvinism and institutional sexism. And I'll go over that in just a second. Patriarchy, though, only benefits males in some ways, and oftentimes not all men. Its elimination would benefit men and women. Now, I want you to think about that, right? Patriarchy, again, is a system in which male dominance is considered a natural right, but it only benefits men in some ways. Why would a sociologist say that? Think about it. Why would a sociologist say that? Okay. Not all men are the same. Not all men are of the middle upper or upper class. Not all men are white. Not all men are able-bodied. Not all men are heterosexual. Not all men are young. Okay? And that's where feminism comes in. Feminism, yeah, like everyone should be treated as equals regardless of their race, class, gender, sex, age, etc. Okay? So again, patriarchy only benefits, this system of male dominance only benefits males in some ways. It will oppress other males in other ways. So when we talk about patriarchy, if we look back at the history of the United States, especially during the times of segregation or apartheid, we could change the location, right? Male patriarchy only benefited white males in the United States, or Afrikaners, which are, I believe, white Dutch in South Africa. Okay, get it? Okay, so not only does it harm women, like we know how it can harm women, but it can also harm different types of men. It can harm men who are same gender loving, so gay men. It can harm disabled men, etc. I really want you to pause here and think about that, Okay, so pause before you go on to the rest. My thing is like stuttering. At least it's stuttering to me. Like I can see myself stuttering. Okay. Fathers tend to be more involved. This is a figure from chapter 12 with their sons, engaged in gender appropriate activities such as sports. Okay. Here, just think about, for those of you who were born into a family that had a father, is this your experience? Okay, because studies do show that fathers tend to be more involved when their sons engage in gender appropriate activities. So if your son is into sports, if your son is into like trucks, if your son is into martial arts, etc. But may not be as involved when your son is into ballet, into dance, into cheerleading. And Netflix has an awesome cheerleading documentary with men who are on cheerleading teams. And a lot of them have issues with their fathers. So it's interesting. Okay. Here, some of you who might not know who Chaz Bono is. Chaz Bono is the transgender son of Cher and Sonny Bono. Cher, do you believe in love after love? Cher. While he was born female, he considered himself male. So if you refer back to that, I believe it was the first image that I showed in this lecture. Some children their sex doesn't match up with their gender identity. Being transgender is not about clothing or a hairstyle. It's about a self-perception. Okay. Traditional images of US gender roles reinforce the idea that women should be subordinate to men. Do these traditional images, do we still see them being reinforced today? Okay, and here is where intersectionality, which I haven't talked much about yet, would come into play. And I will talk about intersectionality probably. I might push back the exam. I'm probably going to push back the exam. So I'll probably talk about intersectionality next week. Okay. But here's where intersectionality and this matrix of domination that Patricia Hill Collins discusses might play a role. So for me, I still see these traditional images of the female and what women should be doing in the United States. It still exists today. Not only is it reinforced by what I see in the television, in the media, but definitely like my parents subscribe to it as well. And in ways I reinforce these systems too. I subscribe to them as well. I'm still that type of person that, again, I am a sociologist and I am of the realm that to each his own. I do believe that, right? But to each his own, to my own. Okay. So I am the type of person that, when I'm with my partner, I do take care of my partner. Okay. So there are certain gender roles that I subscribe to. Okay. And I'm not saying that you should subscribe to that. I'm saying I want to take care of my partner. And if it's cooking, I'll do it. I do it. Okay. But I do it. I choose to do it. So it's not anybody forcing me to do it. Okay. Although our society may have stereotypes that associate motorcycles with men, female bikers demonstrate that a woman's place extends far beyond the kitchen in the modern United States. I currently am learning how to ride a motorcycle. Oh my gosh, the insurance is so much cheaper. And yeah, well, that's the reason why. Okay, they're cheaper to purchase than cars, depending on the brand that you're getting, etc. Okay, but we do still associate motorcycles with men, but there are a lot of female bikers out there. Okay, so what does that say? What does that say? Does that take away from their, you know, image of being, a proper woman, etc.? And then in some cultures, again, this is where that intersectionality comes in. Women do all of the household chores with no help from men, as doing housework is a sign of weakness considered by society as a feminine trait. Okay. What ethnic background are you from? And do you or does your background subscribe to this? Okay. Sexual orientation and inequality. So moving on from inequality, gender inequality, we're going to inequality based on sexual orientation. Inequality based on sexual orientation is defined as a system of inequality in which members with a particular sexual orientation are thought of and treated as less worthy than others. Today, prejudicial attitudes and institutional discrimination are widespread against individuals labeled as homosexuals. This is referred to as heterosexism. Okay, I personally don't like to use the term homosexual. It is medicalized, and I don't use it. I use gay, lesbian, etc. Right? But prejudicial attitudes and institutional discrimination against these individuals is usually referred to as heterosexism. Heterosexism affects a large number of people in the US. The ideology of heterosexism condemns homosexuality as abnormal and lends support to a system of inequality based on sexual orientation in the US. Mistaken notions about homosexuality contribute to widespread prejudicial attitudes and discriminatory practices against gay males and lesbians. Okay. Here, also taken from chapter 12, is from the Kinsey Scale that indicates that sexuality can be measured by more than just heterosexuality and homosexuality. Okay. And again, it's not for this class, but you can definitely take a class with Christy Arford. There is more than just being gay or lesbian. Again, we have the spectrum of pansexuality. We also have those who fall on the spectrum of asexuals, pansexuals, asexuals, gays, lesbians. Yeah. Okay. So again, it doesn't hurt to do a quick Google, and I will do an optional section. I will update that during the weekend for you guys. Sound good? So before I move on, because I forgot to do the last one, okay? So let's do inequality, gender inequality, okay? Since a functionalist says that income inequality is beneficial, racism is beneficial, obviously a functionalist is going to think that gender inequality is beneficial. Okay, how would they state this though? Okay, and they might not, well, I've heard it actually today. I've heard it actually today in 2020. Okay, so they're going to think that they might not say gender inequality is beneficial, but they will say that, the sexes, when it comes to the sexes, when it comes to male and female, like, people have their spots in society. So I've heard people today say, a woman's place is in the household. That's functionalist. Okay. The man is supposed to be the bread earner. And again, if we go back to gender inequality, okay, I'm referring to behaviors, personal traits, and social positions. Okay, the man is supposed to be the bread earner. Okay, that's functionalist. It's a functional way of thinking. Okay, get it? Okay. When it comes to sexual orientation, we'll just tag on to it. What would a functionalist say? Okay. Well, think about it. Okay. If they can say racism, sexism, and economic inequality are beneficial, they will also say that, again, they might not be like, actually, they say it too. Being gay is wrong. They might not say it like that, right? But they will just, somebody who is functionalist would be like, well, don't you want to have children in the future? You know, like, how can you have children if you are a same gender loving couple? Okay. They believe in the natural order of things. Again, these things function the way that they're meant to function. The structures aren't broken to the functionalist. There's man and woman for a reason to the functionalist. Okay. Man and women procreate. So, of course, heterosexism is the way that things are meant to be, the way that things should be. Okay. Now, what would a conflict theorist say about gender inequality and sexual orientation? They're harmful. Okay. And our perfect examples today are any types of LGBTQIA movements. Okay. Again, like fighting for the right to marry, fighting for the right, not even if it's not fighting for the right to marry, fighting for the right to just coexist and live. Okay. We want to be by the bedsides of our loved ones, even if we're not married, because we've been partners forever. Okay. So you see, all your LGBTQIA movements are there. Your women's rights movements are there. There's a reason why after Supreme Court Justice nominee Amy Barrett was nominated, that women took to the streets. Do we get it? Okay. And then symbolic interactionist, right? We take it down from, the macro level. We take it down to more our own neighborhood context or more local context, right? How do these things, gender inequality, sexism, heterosexism, how does it affect you personally? Okay. So let's move on to age inequality. Age inequality is a system of inequality in which members of a particular age group are thought of and treated as less worthy than those of another. Typically, when we discuss ageism, we're referring to older people. Okay, that's not to say that younger people don't face certain types of inequality, but typically it's the older generation that is experiencing higher levels of inequality. Aging, of course, is a natural process. However, it can be interpreted negatively over time. There are myths and stereotypes about growing old that support a system of age inequality in the US that essentially victimizes elders. What do you think about old people? What are some of the stereotypes that you hold and think about the elderly? Okay. And we have theories for these ways of thought. So, for instance, disengagement theory. Some of you guys might actually think of elderly people in this way, right? When it comes to disengagement theory, these are myths and stereotypes, portraying elderly people as a homogeneous, so they're all the same, senile, unproductive, gray-haired mass in a spiraling state of physical and mental deterioration. Proponents of this theory argue that elders should withdraw from the labor force and other activities for the good of society. Okay? So, from our three perspectives, whom does this sound like the most? Functionalist. Okay. I find myself, especially when I'm driving a vehicle, like if I encounter somebody in the left lane or even in the lane in front of me, it doesn't have to be a left lane, but who is driving way below the speed limit, I do, pass on the left and do take a peek. And if it's elderly, I'm always like, that person should be off the road. That person should not be driving at all. Okay. That's functionalist. Okay. I smile because I'm nervous. I'm not smiling because it's true. Because it should happen. I'm not smiling because it should happen. Okay. So, but it's functionalist. Okay. So functionalist so somebody who thinks, again, old people in society, they have definitely worked hard. So think of Emile Durkheim. Everybody occupies a specific place in society, right? But when you've aged, right, it's time to bring in the new. It's time to bring in the new. Okay. And elderly people, you've lived your life. It's time to sit down. It's time to sit down. Go to the nursing home or sit at home. Okay. That's functionalist. Okay. It's time to withdraw from society and let somebody else come in. So it's kind of like this organism that Emile was talking about in chapter 1. Organisms die and new ones come in. Like you get married, you create your own family, you have children, those children create their own family, and it's a cycle. Okay, so this disengagement theory is very functional. Okay, there is also activity theory. I have a slide on that. Activity theory is the actual opposite. So this is a theory that states, again, the opposite. Elderly people aren't this, in this state of necessarily spiraling physical and mental deterioration, but they can still be beneficial to society. That's the conflict perspective. Ageism and this way of thought, this functional way of thought, actually can harm these individuals. That's from the activity theory perspective. So think about it. Are elderly people still useful in society? My parents are elderly. They're over the age of 65. I do take care of them, but they're very useful. Okay? My dad still works. So of course he's useful. He's a farmer. But my mom takes care of my nieces. So she's teaching them French. She's teaching them Creole. She's teaching them Luxembourgish, Spanish. Essentially, she's a teacher. We see, if any of you have ever gone to Market Basket, the baggers, a lot of the baggers are elderly. They're still useful. They're still active. Activity theory goes along and corresponds with the conflict perspective. And the symbolic interactionist perspective, again, more micro and local. How do these things influence you? How do you interpret these things? How do you deal with these things? And then the last one is inequality based on able-bodiedness. It's defined as a system of inequality in which members with physical or mental disabilities are thought of and treated as less worthy than others. Individuals with disabilities are instantly turned into victims in the United States. Ableism, which is the ism, like racism, heterosexism, classism, sexism, justifies prejudice and discrimination directed towards those who have physical and mental impairments. Okay. So our book doesn't actually have a chapter on able-bodiedness. However, my other textbook did. But again, when I'm talking about able-bodiedness, when I'm talking about ableism, I'm talking about people who have physical impairments, and mental impairments and the discrimination that they encounter. Okay. How would a functionalist see this? And again, you guys should start noticing the pattern. It can get pretty messed up. Okay. If those individuals think that, if functionalists think that the elderly should withdraw, what do you think that they would say about those who are disabled, physically or mentally? It's pretty sucky, huh? Okay. What do you think the conflict perspective would say? And then what do you think the symbolic interactionist would say? So I'm not trying to be rough on the functionalist perspective, but there are a lot of individuals who are functionalists right now. Okay. And I'm not going to say right now, they've always been functionalist. However, we've seen how functionalism can play out. And again, you've taken a social science class. Functionalism, again, racism is okay. Sexism is okay. Ableism is okay. Classism is okay. Heterosexism is okay. The absolute worst that could happen under functionalism, with functionalism and with this way of thinking, right, is genocide. And we've seen it. Okay. Expulsion. It's something that almost every continent has faced. Okay, so I want to leave you guys with that. I might just do a little like video, just, picking up on things that I don't like watching myself, but picking up on things that I didn't mention in the videos, because I do want to make sure you guys understand things. And yeah, I might actually push back the exam just 1 week. Sound good? Okay. So I will see you guys later. Okay. So I hope you guys are taking care of yourself. I'm trying to take care of myself. And yeah, let's just press on, guys. Okay. Mwah. Have a good one.